And welcome back to another episode of Locked On Chiefs. We have a very big story for you today. It looks like Kansas City is going to be, or the Chiefs specifically, could be moving to Kansas. We'll talk to Matt Derrick all about it today on Locked On Chiefs.
From the land of the free and the home of the Chiefs, this is the Locked On Chiefs podcast.
And welcome back, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Chiefs, your daily podcast covering the Kansas City Chiefs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for always making Locked On Chiefs your first listen of the day. Don't forget, we're free and available on all platforms, including YouTube as well. I am Chris Clark from Chiefs Corner. That is Matt Derrick from Chiefs Digest, and we'll talk to him in just a moment. But today's show is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. When we start looking at this story, Kansas is looking like they're going to get a deal done for the Chiefs to move to Kansas. That's what we're going to be talking about. When could it happen? Will be later in the show. What's it really mean for this team is going to be in the next segment. But let's just jump in right now, Matt. This is kind of surprising. I was expecting, it was stated that Kansas was going to talk about this in a special session. They were going to have star bonds and they would be voting on it. And we are recording this a little bit early for this Thursday episode. But as of right now, the legislature has already passed the star bond issue and it is going to the Senate.
Yeah, it's moving quick, Chris. I mean, and it's been a whirlwind. I mean, a couple of months, because you just remember, I mean, it was only less than 2.5 months ago that Kansas City and Jackson County voters voted on whether they were going to extend the sales tax, to redo Arrowhead and build a new baseball stadium for the Royals, and that got rejected. And then it looked like, I mean, it wasn't more than 24 hours before the idea that the Royals and the Chiefs maybe both going to Kansas started up, and especially the Chiefs. And that talk really picked up. And then when nothing got done during the Kansas legislative session, it was like, okay, maybe Missouri still has a chance here. But the momentum at this point, especially with the fact that we're probably going to be at the end of this week with Kansas having a firm offer of money. No, a site hasn't been selected. No, where these teams are going to go is not in firm place. There's not a stadium design. There's some mock-ups that are out there that I'm sure a lot of people have seen. But there's a lot that would still have to happen to get it done. I mean, the Chiefs and the Royals would both have to accept the terms and hammer out leases with the state, all of that. So there's still some legal rambling to do. But, you look at what's going to happen in Missouri. Well, Missouri has no plans for a special session. And honestly, I mean, if Missouri wants to keep the Chiefs, they're going to have to approve sports betting, which they show absolutely no signs of being able to get done. Maybe it ends up as an issue. There's a group trying to get it on the November ballot so voters can approve it and go around the legislature. We'll see if that happens. But then Missouri and Kansas City or some entity is going to have to get together. And right now there's no proposal. There's no entity that's in place that would say, okay, we're the ones that's going to host this and put it together. Jackson County, has not been able to get unified on this. For Frank White still is trying to stop the Chiefs from going across the state line and invoking the border war a peace agreement again. So, I mean, there's a lot of moving parts to it, but once Kansas has this proposal in place, I mean, you are so close now to a firm offer. And that's when, you start hammering out the lease. And that's something that could even take a couple of weeks to a couple of months. I mean, it could all be done, though, the time that Missouri General Assembly gets back into a session next year.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was gonna say is that if they're waiting until November to try to even bring sports betting on, this is probably going to be done, and I would imagine this could be done maybe even by the end of training camp. The Chiefs have sent people to the state legislature to make a presentation, and they're saying that they need about $2 billion to construct a new stadium, to have a dome stadium, which, be fair about it, means that Kansas would be hosting a Super Bowl in the future. We don't know when that would be specifically, obviously, but that's something that we'll talk about a little bit later. But what this really means is that the state of Kansas is really ready to just pounce on this and take advantage, because say what you want about Jackson County, and I understand Missouri decided they didn't want to pay the sales tax. That's fine. That's your choice. But right now, Kansas is looking like they're going to have a star bond issue done probably by the end of this week. And if they're able to make an offer, I don't see any way that the Chiefs turn it down, especially if they're getting the $2 billion that they're asking for. I don't think this is going to be going back to the state of Missouri. I think it's going to be a done deal. Granted, you're right. There's legal stuff. There's, they got to select a site. They got to get a lease. They got to do all that. But if you have the money part of it figured out, which is the biggest portion of this, I think it gets done, and it could be done as early as this week.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have a lot of assumptions about some things that we really don't know if are true. Some of them is just how far along the Chiefs and Kansas really are as far as this process goes. There's a senator on Tuesday that said, hey, there's 5 to 6 sites that are out there that could be considered for both teams. Does not sound like this is going to be any of these locations would be a dual concept. So it would not be a Chiefs and Royals complex in one. It would be both teams in separate locations, wouldn't have a shared parking lot like they do now, nothing of that nature. So there's still, a lot of things to figure out. And then if it's, you're going to have to have some feasibility studies and all of these things. There's still parts of it that could take a while. But the main thing to me is that, if this is a firm offer from Kansas that you're going to have right now, is what's the clock on it? How long would Missouri have in order to try and match it? Like we talked about, if in the best case scenario, they're able to approve sports gambling in November, that's one element, but Missouri doesn't really have an equivalent to the Kansas Star bonds. So if the state's going to kick in money, it's going to have to be a little bit differently done. That's one reason why with Jackson County, with the last, remodeling and refurbishment of these stadiums that was done, Jackson County did it with a sales tax. That's why that if they were going to keep these teams in Jackson County, it was going to be a sales tax. Missouri doesn't really have the exact same tools that Kansas does for some development. So that makes it a little bit trickier. And then right now, nothing gets through the Missouri legislature. So, and hey, let's face it. Missouri has a history of losing some sports teams. They've lost a couple of football teams in St. Louis. Haven't lost a baseball team in a while, but that's always been a possibility too. So let's see what happens. But what the action that we have seen and really the last couple of days, I see it being very, very difficult at this point for the Chiefs not to accept what's happening on the Kansas side and flow with it, because I don't think they're going to get a better deal.
Well, and the big thing is what is Missouri going to offer? Because you said something that is a very key point. Missouri doesn't have star bonds. And the reason that makes such a big difference is because if Missouri is going to do something, they're likely to come back and they're likely to look at Arrowhead and they're going to look at it for renovations. It's going to cost a lot less for Missouri to get something like that done, but they couldn't get it passed on a sales tax. So how are they going to pass it? How are they going to fund it? That's the big question that would be coming in that regard. And if the Chiefs are sitting there with a firm offer of a state being willing to basically build you a brand new stadium, are you going to turn that down for somebody willing to come back and say, oh, we'll give you what you wanted or close to what you wanted for your Arrowhead renovation? I don't think that that's really even a comparison at that point.
Yeah, and with what Kansas is able to do with the star bonds and what you're able to do from a development standpoint, and that's the other big thing with this, is that it would be very difficult, if impossible, without Missouri really coming up with a new tool, a new development tool, to build a stadium that the Chiefs would have control over. In Missouri, if they're going to build a stadium and they're going to build it with bonds, they would have to have it owned by a municipal entity. So it would have to be Jackson County. It would have to be Kansas City, Missouri, or North Kansas City, or you pick your city. But whereas in Kansas can, with the star bonds, they're able to give the control of that stadium to the Chiefs, and that's what they want. They want it to be their building that they make the money off of. And yeah, they're going to have to pay the bonds and they have to service the debt, but that is long term what the Chiefs want. And they've never had that control with Arrowhead Stadium. They're never going to have that control with Arrowhead Stadium.
Yeah, and they're never going to have that control of Missouri, and that is a huge difference and a huge boon for Kansas to be able to offer that and give the Chiefs to be able to offer that. Now, obviously, maybe it's going to entice the Royals to come here as well, or to come to Kansas as well. I will say this, Kansas, once it was done in April, I think I've probably gotten, and I live in Kansas, so I think I've probably gotten maybe 6 or 7 different text messages over the last 2 months of, hey, tell your legislator to vote for this, tell your senator to vote for this type thing. And so Kansas is really excited about this. And obviously the team would likely stay in Kansas City. We'll talk about that more here in just a moment when we get back. With killer last-minute deals, Gametime makes it a lot easier to get your MLB tickets, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying MLB, NFL, NBA, NHL, any of those types of games and concert tickets. You can get them at Gametime. Save up to 60% off buying last minutes for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, or more. Save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or event. Save even more when you choose a section and let Gametime choose the seats for you. Gametime has the lowest price guarantee, or Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. Your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets for your sporting event, whether it's MLB, NFL, NHL, NBA. Tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL. That's LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off your first purchase. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, so what's it mean for this team? At this point, you're looking at a situation where the Chiefs are likely to move to Kansas, or at least get an offer that would make them want to move to Kansas. We'll talk a little bit later about when that could possibly happen, but what does it mean for the team right now?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it would have very little short-term effect, I don't think. It's everything that would happen with this would be very long-term. So, I would expect that Jackson County is going to hold both these teams, and especially certainly the Chiefs, to their leases. So I would expect the Chiefs to be playing through the 2030 season at Arrowhead. So you're talking about a long lead time. In that case, all of this other decisions that you have to make, and there could be other things included. I mean, we haven't seen the entire process get down. They haven't gotten to the lease agreements yet to see what else could be put in there, because Kansas could very well be saying, okay, you know what? Yeah, we're going to kick in 75%, but we also want the team's headquarters in Kansas, and we want training camp in Kansas. I mean, those were contingencies, especially training camp was a contingency when Missouri kicked in money to renovate Arrowhead last time around, and to build the Chiefs a new training, to build the facilities at Missouri Western for the Chiefs training camp. Big part of that was that they had to make a commitment to bring a training camp back to Missouri for 10 years. There could be something of that nature in that, which means that now are you looking at the prospects of the Chiefs considering sites in Kansas for training camp? Would they want to stay in Missouri just to keep that relationship? Would Kansas allow them to continue doing that? Then you've got obviously the team headquarters. If you're not playing at Arrowhead, there's no reason, it doesn't make any sense to still have your team headquarters out in Jackson County, and Kansas once again could require that. Yeah,
and you're also looking at a situation where some of the things they've talked about, Clark Hunt not spending money on the practice fields, the practice facilities. You're not going to want those away from where you're going to be playing. So you're going to want those, and they would be built brand new with a new stadium. So that's going to be something that they're going to have to look at. And you're right, that's going to have to be something that is going to be addressed. I would imagine that Kansas is going to want training camp in Kansas, and maybe it's going to be in Lawrence. Maybe it's going to be in Manhattan. Who knows where they're going to decide that they would want it. But there's lots of different places in the Kansas area that they could probably do that. And they have lead time to get it done. That's the most important thing is you said 2031 is likely when we're going to be talking about, all the different details that need to be figured out until then. But the Chiefs are in a situation where at this point, you're right, short term, it's not really going to affect things for them. They're going to be working on getting new plans for a new stadium if this passes like we think it's going to. And they're going to be looking at different sites. They're going to be looking at how they're going to build it, what their design is going to be. It sounds like they want 20,000 parking spots. So they want a couple hundred acres to be able to build this. I would imagine that that's going to include the practice facilities and a team center for them as well in Kansas. And I mean, the interesting thing to me on this is you get into topics that aren't even being discussed right now, and the fact that how much is Missouri going to be losing out? And I'm not 100% sure on this, but I'm 99% sure. Casey Moe is the one that has a local tax. So the city will be losing money, and the state of Missouri will be losing money on all the tax revenue that comes in from sports players coming into the state to play, because that is something that gets taxed at the state level whenever you play. So they will lose, all the Chiefs players here for 8 or 9 games a year, plus all the other players that come in. So that's going to be something. It'll be written off as it's not a huge loss, but it's going to cost the state. It's going to cost the city.
Yeah, and yes, Kansas City has an earnings tax of 1% that obviously applies to every employee, but it also applies to the players and coaches who come in to play. I mean, they get charged that 1% as well when they play at Arrowhead. There's some place
in KC Mo, right?
That's just in KC Mo. And there's obviously, for those who don't live in the area, I mean, if you don't, for like some of the players, they're probably able to get a little bit of their money back when they play on the road if they don't live in Kansas City, Missouri. I mean, there's some little tricks to the trade of the earnings tax, but everybody that works in the facility pays that too. I mean, because they all work in Kansas City, Missouri. So it's a big number that Kansas City, Missouri is certainly going to be missing out on. But to me, one of the things that stands out about the timeline and what will happen is that there's also no guarantee and no need for 3 elements to be together. That's the stadium, the training complex, and the team headquarters. There are plenty of organizations that have all 3 of those in different places. There's a lot of teams that obviously, a growing number of teams that have their headquarter training complex separate from their stadium. I mean, it's very rare for them to be in the same place anymore. So increasingly rare, at least. So that's a thing I could certainly see, because if you look at the sites that have been up for discussion, and honestly, I mean, the only site that I've heard being connected to the Chiefs has been the one at the southwest corner of 435 and 70, which would be across Interstate 70 from the Legends and that complex and the Speedway right there. Doesn't necessarily mean it's going there. They've said, as we mentioned earlier, there's 5 to 6 sites. My understanding is that most of those are probably Royal sites that are more under discussion, that there's only maybe 1 or 2 that are Chiefs under discussion. But those things could change once they, get into feasibility studies and all of that. They may find that one site doesn't work. Maybe there's some issues there. Can always be ownership issues, structural issues. I mean, there's a reason why, to a degree, that maybe things never really developed around, the sports complex as it is in Jackson County. We were talking about that off air, Chris. I mean, it's like a limestone ridge around there. It's a really, a rough terrain. I mean, there's parts that are just absolutely wooded. And there's like native areas and everything that are protected. So, going in and developing around there has never been easy. And that's probably one of the reasons why there hasn't been development. So that's going to be a consideration. But short term, I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of changes. But obviously, when you get to the longer term, which would be, around 2030, 2031, 2032 range, that's when everything, and I wouldn't be surprised if some things took place earlier. I mean, if the Chiefs decide that they want to move their headquarters to a new location, they could obviously start working on that, and that could be done separately from the stadium if the stadium's going to be in a different place.
Yeah, no, and that makes a lot of sense, and you're right. It's going to be fascinating to see how this goes. And the one thing that I just thought about while we were sitting here talking about this is, I hope that I hope the Chiefs still have training camp out in public somewhere. I hope that they don't do a training facility in Kansas and they just keep training camp at home, because I think that would take a lot of experience that fans love to go have that training camp experience. And, the fans, and I'm sure media enjoys it for the most part as well, because you're not in the same place all the time.
Yeah, and if the Chiefs, if they do build a new training complex, obviously we're talking about they probably will, I would imagine that one would be built with the idea of incorporating fans, because that's something that most teams still want to do. Even teams that train at their own complex, they have an ability to set up temporary fans and stands. I mean, you don't need huge numbers. Kansas City, the Chiefs have gotten some 10,000 fans, shoved in around in St. Joe in the past, but they don't do it with a huge amount of infrastructure. So, a lot of it's just standing around, and it's those bleachers that are set up. I mean, you can set up a temporary facility that, can handle that. And I'm sure that would absolutely, there's just no room at their current facility because it wasn't really part of their plan. But, I would expect them to build it in for that prospect. But to your point about going away for camp, I mean, that's probably that's an Andy Reid relic.
Yeah,
once Andy Reid's gone, I don't think they're going about the camp anymore.
Okay, fair enough. I was going to say, if Andy Reid has anything to say about it, they'll be going away for camp somewhere.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's going to be the big question. But we're talking about this, and we're going to talk when we get back about when this could happen, because that really is going to play into the whole Andy Reid discussion when we get back. Summertime means baseball. The NBA finals are over. The NHL finals are pretty close to done. But there is always things that you can bet for on FanDuel. And man, if they had something about the Chiefs right now, I would say that you'd feel pretty good about Kansas being able to take the Chiefs from Missouri. That would be something that I'd be looking to try to bet on. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 you can use to bet on anything from the Finals MVP on to who's going to hit one out of the park. Is Bobby Witt Jr. going to hit one out of the park sometime this week? I would say that's probably a pretty good bet. Maybe Salvador Perez as well. Lots of different Royals that are playing right now that you could go bet on, and you can make some bets on FanDuel. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and get a big win to your summer bucket list. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Are you tired of listening to all the screaming at ESPN? Then go check out Locked On Sports Today. Locked On Sports Today is going to have you covered 24 hours a day on the YouTube channel. You can get 24/7 sports coverage from your local teams and much, much more. Go check out Locked On Sports Today. It's fantastic. All right, Matt, you started to talk about something that has a lot to do with, and when we start talking about how it could happen or when it could happen, you said early on 2031, which makes sense. The lease is over in 2030. Andy Reid's contract goes through 2029. He'll be a little bit older than he is right now, obviously, and maybe he won't be the coach. But if he has anything to say about it, they will be going away for camp. So that would be part of it if he still plans on coaching that long.
Yeah, and we're talking about, Chris. We're recording this a little bit early, but this as we were just talking about this, the Kansas Senate has approved it. So Star Bonds have moved that quickly. They're going on the Governor Laura Kelly's desk now, so she could either sign it or allow it to go into law. So this is going to effect. So, the Chiefs in Kansas can now start negotiating.
It's just crazy how quickly this has gone.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see. I would be certainly, by the time you're listening to this, you might have a statement from the Chiefs and from Clark Hunt about what their next steps are and what they're thinking. I would be surprised, I think, if they just flat out said, "Hey, we're moving to Kansas. It's going to be great." I think you would certainly say that, hey, they're looking forward to opening talks with Kansas about a lease and locations and all of that. So, it's still going to be a laborious process, but there's no doubt. Kansas moved quickly to get this done.
Yeah, and they're not going to say anything. They're not going to say anything that will take away leverage on their point, and they shouldn't. That's whole part of negotiations is you don't say, "Hey, we're moving to Kansas." You say, "All right, it's time to start negotiating." And if it doesn't happen, it still doesn't happen. But at this point, man, the Kansas Senate went quick right after the Kansas legislature, and that is amazing because when you start talking about governments, they never seem to move fast. This one did. And we'll see what comes of it. But when you start looking at what this is going to mean in the future, Patrick Mahomes will still be here in 2031. I think that's currently the final year of his contract, if I remember correctly. But he'll still be in Kansas City in 2031. And the question is, Andy Reid, is he going to still be around? Obviously, he'll be a little bit older. But this is going to be a while. This is going to be something that at this point, as we're recording this, we're recording this a little bit early for Thursday, and as you said, it just passed the Kansas Senate. Now it goes to Governor Laura Kelly, and now she has to talk, and they get to a point where they can start negotiating. Basically, it's June 20th, and then we'll start negotiating. And I'm not going to say it's going to be a done deal by the end of training camp. Could be. They could have a lot of things figured out between now and then, but they have plenty of time. It's not something that they have to force through very quickly. I would expect Kansas has a timeline on it. They want to, get something in writing and get something done. But this is moving really quickly, and I think that this is going to be something that's going to be a lot of fun over the next couple of months.
Yeah, and both teams their leases at the Jackson County Sports Complex runs through January 2031, And I don't think that we can expect any scenario where Jackson County lets them out of their leases early. So I think both those teams are absolutely staying through the 2030 seasons. Question then, is, could there be a possible negotiation? Like I said, I think that's very unlikely. So you're probably looking at both of these teams moving into their new facilities in 2031. So for the Chiefs, that would mean, right now, for instance, Andy Reid, you bring him up, he is signed through the 2029 season. So him staying through the end of Arrowhead would only be one more year. For the 2030 season, he'd be 72. So I don't think that's outside the realm of possibility that Andy Reid would stick around for that long. Obviously, Mahomes is under contract through 2031, so he'll be there.
Yeah. Do you know for a fact that when it ends in 2031? Like, is it over January 1st or is it over the end of January?
January 31st, 2031 is the end date for both leases, for the Royals and the Chiefs.
Okay. Just double checking, because that could be interesting when you start talking playoffs.
There could, I haven't looked at that now that the NFL is pushing back the Super Bowl date. I haven't looked, but I would, imagine there's still a likelihood that the AFC Championship game would fall in January. But if it did not, and the Chiefs were hosting the AFC Championship game in February, that would be after the Arrowhead lease expired in January of 2031. So that could be.
That would be an interesting all new headache that they would have to figure out. Which I'm sure they wouldn't want to move. They'd want to play. They'd want to finish out in Arrowhead, and that would make sense. There's too many logistics to try to move to a new stadium at the time where you're going through the playoffs.
Yeah. So. No, that would be a nightmare to try and do that, and I don't think the NFL would even allow it because typically you've got to have your stadium in place. There are actually rules on that. And there's been some issues, and that's one thing that does play into what this could mean for the longer term as far as getting a Super Bowl in Kansas City. If you have a dome stadium in the NFL, you build one, the unwritten rule is you're getting a Super Bowl. So, it would be very likely that Kansas City would host one. The last few stadiums that have opened, it's been in year 2. The NFL wants year 1 for the stadium to be open, to work through all the bugs. They don't want to have anything happen in the Super Bowl season. So they want a stadium to have its, feet under it before it would get a Super Bowl. But could the Chiefs, could Kansas City be hosting a Super Bowl as early as 2033? Yeah, they absolutely could. It would absolutely put Kansas City in the race for a Final Four and regionals. That was NCAA regionals. It would open them up to a lot of different things. I would anticipate that this stadium would also absolutely be FIFA friendly. So it's going to be built for World Cups and any other international competitions you'll have in soccer.
Yeah, and Kansas is definitely, I would imagine, is going to want to take care of or take advantage of anything that they can actually use that stadium for. Obviously, the Chiefs would have control, and that's going to be part of it. But you're absolutely right. I think that's a big thing. That you look at soccer coming here very soon, and then you look at the Final Four that they would be able to host in that stadium. That'd be huge for the area. But the big thing is you start talking about how this is going to play out. And one of the biggest things, and one of the things that's great about this happening now, is we're talking about this in summer of 2024. They have 6 years before they can even, 7 years, I guess, technically, before they can even be moved. And so infrastructure shouldn't be a problem. They're going to have to figure out a site. They're going to have to figure out all that. And if it's a done deal, I don't think that's going to be an issue, but they should be able to get the additional roads built that they are going to need. I would imagine the highways are going to have to be redone a little bit if they're going to have that type of capacity for what you're talking about the Chiefs are going to bring.
Yeah, and that's, I think we'll probably have a lot more discussions about that, about the Royals, because the Royals, have indicated that they wanted urban setting for their ballpark. So we'll see if that continues. I know that there have been some suburban sites and even greenfield sites that have been mentioned as possible Royals destinations. The Chiefs, if the Chiefs end up anywhere other than the Legends and that area of Wyandotte County, I'll be very surprised. It could still happen, but we'll see. But I'm assuming that's going to be one of the sites that, of course, they fix on the first at the very beginning. We'll see if there's been any other discussions or progress anywhere else. But yeah, and I don't think it's going to affect another thing, Chris, and that's going to be the Arrowhead Stadium renovations for the 2026 World Cup. those have started this offseason as far as some of the infrastructure that's going on at Arrowhead to get ready for that. Then there's going to be the massive one after the 2025 season where they really retrofit Arrowhead to get ready for the World Cup that summer. And then they're going to doing a lot of work to get it ready for the 2026 football season. But it does raise, my question is about, how much of those changes do they undo if they're going to be moving out of Arrowhead in 4 or 5 years? So,
right.
Do they rethink some of their plans? They're spending about $300 million, I believe, on, refitting Arrowhead and then refitting Arrowhead after the World Cup, before and after. So does that change, some of their post World Cup plans? I don't know, but there's a lot of moving pieces. This is a big deal. Kansas is absolutely in the driver's seat to get the Chiefs to move there. There's a lot of moving pieces that have to be settled in. And obviously, I can't say that Missouri is completely out of it, but I just think it's going to be really, really hard for them to get back in the race.
Well, and the big thing, one of the bigger things, and I kind of mentioned this earlier, we didn't really talk about it too much, but you look at what Clark Hunt was reamed for in the players report, and it's not having a good practice facility. Well, when they build a brand new one, they go back to your point of, if they're going to be moving in 6 years, how much are you going to want to invest into a brand new practice facility or brand new, that type of facility? Maybe you want to invest in better equipment in your weight room because you can move that stuff. That makes sense. But when you're talking about the actual facility stuff, that's a lot different. And are you going to want to spend millions of dollars in the next couple of years for something that's not going to be in use in 6 years? There's just not. You can make the argument that it makes a lot of sense to spend the money because the team is doing so well and you have to feel like they're making money. But at the same time, from a business perspective, you're not going to want to spend millions of dollars that you're basically going to be throwing away in 6 years. Yeah, you can get some of the stuff and move it, but it's the facilities themselves, the practice areas, and some of that you're not going to be able to.
Yeah, that's why I do need to go back and check the agreements to make sure about this. My understanding is that most of the tax abatements and the benefits that the Chiefs got for moving training camp to Missouri and keeping their headquarters in Kansas City, Missouri, and building that new building at the sports complex, that those have expired or passed. So I don't believe there's anything tying the Chiefs. There's certainly nothing tying the Chiefs to Missouri for training camp. They looked strongly at moving the camp in the past and came very close to moving, is my understanding, to Pittsburgh State. So they've considered other locations. I don't think there's anything that would prevent them from moving their complex early, and they have outgrown that. They don't have enough space for parking for all their employees. They got a lot of employees who are doubling up in cubes and offices. They do not have enough space in that building. And obviously that applies to the players too. They're really not built for having the size of, and especially even just the extra players in the practice squad. They weren't built for that kind of, having a locker room set for 69 active players plus, an injured reserve list.
Wasn't it 59, 60 before?
They were built to handle 90 players, but only for a couple of weeks. They weren't,
right.
That locker room wasn't built to, handle the expanded practice squad and everything of that nature. And obviously all the other players you can end up with that. So even when, they come back for those couple of weeks, there's players doubling up for lockers. So, and honestly, the building's getting a little aged. And that was one of the things that Clark Hunt talked about, is that they're in kind of a window where they weren't sure what their future was with that building, if they were going to stay there, if they needed to remodel or they needed to move to a new location, because their staff is so large. When I think they moved, to that facility, I think they had under 200 employees outside the football operations. Now I think they're close to 300. So, that gives you an indication of just how that the team has changed. Their needs have changed. And that building doesn't suit their purpose anymore. So what they choose going forward, and like I said, I think it'll be, the discussion that they have about whether they have a headquarters building that's separate for their facility or they put it all in the same place, and how close it is to the stadium. And like I said, unless Kansas specifies it, maybe that's how they keep their foot in Missouri, and they try and, keep people happy on both sides. Maybe.
I'll be interested to see what they do, because you're right. With this being done, with this being basically something that they can start discussing now, there's nothing about their headquarters having to be in Missouri. If they move the headquarters to Kansas, that opens up the current headquarters for whatever the Chiefs would want to do. I mean, they could essentially renovate and add not necessarily practice facility stuff there, but they could add some rehab stuff. I mean, they could do stuff with the building that wouldn't cost as much as building a whole new area. So maybe that's one way that they take care of some of that is expand that way, move their headquarters, move their non-player operations elsewhere, and that frees up extra building space for everything else.
Yeah, there's a lot of options that can happen at this point. So there's nothing set in stone. I mean, this is at this point just step one in the process. There's a lot of things that still need to happen. It's not a guarantee. I still would handicap the idea that the Chiefs are going to Kansas is better than 90%. I just don't think that there's enough momentum to go the other way.
Thank you. I was about to ask that exact question. What's the percentage?
The details are what can really be shaped at this point. I think it's going to be very difficult for Missouri to get its act together. And I say that as a Missouri resident and a Missouri voter. I've just watched this, for too long now. I just don't see there's a momentum. I just don't see them being able to get all the pieces that they need to do to match what Kansas offers been put together.
Well, and the big thing that Missouri can't offer is they can't offer a Super Bowl. They can't offer, like you said, the ownership or the control of the area. It's got to be a municipal area. So that's something that's, if Kansas is able to get a good offer to them and they were able to negotiate what the terms are going to be at, you're right. I don't think Missouri can get it done because they can't match what Kansas can. And that's one of the biggest things here. And that's going to be something fascinating to talk about. We will have more for you when we get more details on it. Matt, thank you for being here today. And thank you for actually breaking that right in the middle of our show. That the Senate has already approved it. That is.
And by the time you listen to it, the governor's probably already signed it. So
yeah, there you go. That could happen as well. Well, thank you all for listening today. Ryan will be back with me tomorrow. We will have more to talk about, and then we're going to get into more of our positional reviews and get you ready for training camp. Thank you all for listening today, and we will talk to you.